We're live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our guest visitor, Jesal Gadhia. We're going to talk about how to hire engineering talent without the BS. My name is Michelle Bakels. I'm program director here at G2I. I focus on developer health, so initiatives that support the mental and physical health of software developers. At G2I, we're a hiring platform focused on connecting healthy remote developers to healthy development teams. And we have these community events that are set up by our community manager, Thea, to talk about all things around tech, whether it is development or hiring, or we had to talk about neurofeedback, so just the way the brain works. Today, we're going to have a talk about building an inclusive hiring culture with Jesal Gadhia, who is Senior Engineering Manager at BetterUp. He's also a developer himself with lots of experience as a developer on a team, and the author of a viral blog post about this very topic. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Jesal Gadhia. Thanks so much for joining us. Really excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. I am super excited to talk to you about this topic on how to build an inclusive hiring culture. And this painting is actually one of my favorite paintings. It's from a website called Programmer Paintings, and it's kind of a humorous take on kind of what a scene today would look like in a modern day workforce if you had a engineer being judged on their work, and take a little binary tree inversion or whiteboarding. Um, so just a little humorous painting, which we kind of reimagined for modern times. But before we get started, a little about me. You may be wondering, why is this guy here? Why does he get to talk about hiring? So I have about 15 years of experience in the industry, doing all sorts of stuff. I've been an engineer. I've been a two-time founder. And part of that time, one of my companies was a consulting firm. So I'd hired a lot of engineers, offshore as well as onshore. And my second company was a product company. It was a mentorship platform. And on that company as well, I did a bunch of hiring of engineers and ended up building a kind of a global distributed remote engineering team. And then in the past 10 years, I've been kind of focused more on hypergrowth leadership, been in director engineering and engineering management roles. Latest one being at BetterUp, where I helped scale our engineering team from about a dozen engineers to over 100 globally distributed engineering team. And in that experience, I learned quite a few things. I've been on the both sides of the table. I've been a candidate hundreds of times, and I've been a hiring manager hundreds of times. And through that experience, I kind of was reflecting, what have I seen that's very common, that's very prevalent. And what I ended up seeing was things that were on the surface very logical. And a lot of times, hiring managers like me are engineers themselves, so they think in a very logical way. So, first things that comes to a hiring manager's mind is, hey, if I'm hiring an engineer, we expect them to know a lot of technical concepts. And we expect them to maybe in live interview setting memorize a lot of them. So a lot of these interviews index on the fact that, oh, maybe you should be able to do some of these assignments off the top of your head based on your memory, like binary tree inversion or algorithmic kind of leak coding. Similarly, the other thing that kind of has been kind of prevalent is, like, if you are a good engineer, if you're a great engineer, you should be able to do the assessment very quickly. So speed became a primary metric, and that, hey, we want to put the candidate in this Interview setting, maybe 30, 60 minutes, and have them crank through the solution. And if they're good, they'll complete it always. And the third pattern that emerged was we will get a sense of a candidate just by talking to them, just by getting a gut sense of what is it, what are their skills, what are they like. That makes a lot of sense at the surface level, but it again leads to a pretty poor candidate experience. So what that leads to, and I love this meme by the way, it's a meme that says in the technical interview, it looks completely different than your actual job. And what this leads to is a common candidate experience, which is lead coding, whiteboarding, brain teasers. We've seen brain teasers, some of those famous ones, like why are manhole covers round? What does that have to do with the job? Really nothing. And then we've seen also famous examples of really stellar candidates and stellar engineers getting rejected. One that came to mind was a person who had written a homebrew, which is a package manager that lots of developers use. And when this person went out to interview at Google, they asked them to do a binary tree inversion, and this person said, I designed a package manager that almost your entire company uses, but I don't know how to do live lead coding." And they're like, "Yeah, then you're not the right fit," and they got rejected. So lots of stories like that. And why does it matter? Why does it matter? So one thing is you end up like in this case, the person that you are trying to join Google, it's unfair assessment of their skills. You're not really assessing what they're good at. You're not assessing if they'll be successful at their day-to-day job. And what that leads to is missed opportunities. As an hiring team, you end up wasting a lot of time just trying to filter through a lot of candidates through your funnel, and you end up losing out on a lot of talent. It just leads to a very inefficient process. And thirdly, it's going to result in lack of diversity because there's research that proves that underrepresented folks from underrepresented backgrounds, they tend not to do great in this kind of high pressure lead coding type of an interview setting. So you may be wondering, okay, what does great look like in this case, right? Let's talk about that. Let's dive into that. So the first thing is to make sure you have upfront communication. And you may be wondering, okay, we communicate with our candidates. We tell them everything that they should expect. Or what does this mean? What I've seen is as an interview team, as a hiring team, we definitely let the candidate know that, hey, we have N number of interviews and this is what you'll expect. But a lot of times this happens in a verbal conversation on a call. So the candidate is like frantically trying to type notes, trying to like make sure that they're understanding what the expectations are, but it's still not thorough. It's not something that they can go back, reference, and kind of wrap their head around. So what I mean here is having expectations clearly laid out about each stage. How long is this each stage? Who's going to be the interviewer? What are the criteria that they're going to be looking for? What's the success criteria? And what's when can they expect to hear back? So just give them a sense of the end-to-end process. You can even make this you use platforms like Guide and that make this candidate experience much more nicer. They provide a portal, and you can go in and kind of see videos of the company. And you don't need to use tools like this. You can do this on a Word doc. You can do it on a Notion doc. Keep it very simple. But as long as this is something that's written, communicated upfront, and you're aligning with the candidate, that sets a really great foundation for the rest of it. And here I wanted to just kind of show you a sample email that I've sent and my hiring team has sent to candidate. And this is for a systems or live coding interview, a pair programming exercise that we used to do with candidates. This breaks down exactly what our expectations are. We say, hey, like we are going to be using a specific technology. We will expect them to be good at JavaScript, HTML. We're not going to expect them to know some of the other things in that exercise. We also let them know that, hey, don't worry about setting up the cloud-based environment. Don't worry about bringing your own environment. We'll set up the environment for you in the interview. And then further, we actually share the code that we're going to be using as a foundation to build upon and to do pair programming on. So when they enter the interview, it's not a shock. It's not like, oh my gosh, let me wrap my head around this and then I can kind of situate myself. They already know exactly what's going to happen. Super useful. It kind of calms the nerves and sets a really, really nice foundation to have a very authentic conversation. That brings me to the other point, which is it's really important to have a realistic assessment when you are assessing for the right skills. What does that look like? It can be that pair programming exercise I was just talking about. It can be just candidate live coding, building a feature. It could be a paid trial where you bring them in on a paid project, or it could be a take home assignment where you just give them an assignment. They add the capabilities they request and they send it back to you and you grade it. Now, building these realistic assessments does take a lot of work. We used to build these assessments in-house, and maintaining these assessments is not easy. Software is constantly updating. So you have to update the libraries, you have to update the frameworks, and then if you don't keep up with it, these assessments would break. And that's even actually more embarrassing as a hiring team showing that to candidates. So what we have actually found is leveraging organizations, companies like G2I is actually a really great strategy here to get the best of both worlds. You let the experts administer these assessments that are realistic. They take on the maintenance. They know exactly how to set up this technology. And you get to provide a candidate with a very realistic assessment without all the burden of building this in-house. Because that's also a challenge. How do we build an assessment that's fair, that is going to get the right signals? So let that outsource that, let the experts figure that out, but at the same time, give a great experience to your candidates. But that realistic assessments alone, it doesn't do the job. That's not where you stop. You actually need to have a structured interview. Now that you have a realistic assessment, what are you actually going to look for in there? So it's important to define what are the competencies that you're looking for. And once you have the criteria, the competencies listed out, figure out what kind of questions can you ask to get signals on that criteria. And then you can enable your interview team to say, hey, okay, these are the competencies, these are the criteria, these are the questions that you can ask. Now that everybody kind of has that figured out, then you can go into training and then you can actually train your interviewers live in interviews. So what we have done, what I've found great success is you have one interviewer that is trained up that leads the session, and then you have onboard another interviewer to shadow them and just learn how this entire interview goes. The next time, switch it around. Let the person who shadowed take the lead, and then the more experienced interviewer will reverse shadow them. After that, you can calibrate. You can say, hey, okay, these two interviewers go out and rate the candidate, and then meet and say, are our ratings aligned? If they are not, then you kind of have to discuss, hey, where do we go wrong? Where do we need to align? What are the expectations? Where is the miscommunication? So to repeat that with your entire interview team. That way, you can make sure that your candidate experience is very consistent, no matter who the interviewer is. And what I've also, in addition, what I've done is to do retrospectives, monthly retros, to figure out what are we hearing from candidates, what kind of signals are we hearing, and kind of tweak the process. Is the tools we're using right? Are we asking the right questions? Are we getting the right kind of signals? So that way you kind of constantly learn, and it's just like, developing a product. You're building a machine here. So make sure that is well calibrated, well oiled. That way, no matter who is interviewing, interviewers can change, but the candidate experience will stay consistent. And then here's an example scoring rubric that we've used. So now that you have your competencies defined, your criteria, now we can actually operationalize this into a very structured scoring rubric. So let me take you through this. So what you see at the bottom, it says greenhouse scorecard. So this scoring rubric is for our systems thinking interview. What you see in the bottom is the categories, the competencies that we're looking for from a candidate at a high level. So we want to make sure that the candidate is pragmatic in their decision making. We want to make sure that they have product engineering chops. We want to make sure that they have technical craftsmanship. We want to make sure that they have the ability to do systems thinking. And that you could see here is the 50% because that's pretty heavily weighted because that's the whole entire interview. And then we further break it down. Okay, what does systems thinking actually entail? So we break that down in the top here. You see two categories: data modeling, system design. And those two categories have very specific tasks. Did they do this? Did they do that? And we get to rate them on yes or zero to -2. So baseline, they start with green. They did it. But if they don't, then the interviewer nudges them a little bit. And says, hey, can you kind of tries to get that signal. If you had to nudge a little bit, we subtract a point. If we had to kind of push them hard and still we are not getting signal, then we deduct 2 points. So just having some sort of way to make sure that we are being very objective between a candidate A, candidate B. If the candidate A came in and boom, 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 just did everything without nudging, then we don't deduct any points. If we had to guide them a little bit more, we deduct points accordingly. And so, and then we get an overall score. Okay, where did they land? Was it a strong yes, a yes, a baseline? And then we tally all that up, and then we kind of get a sense of, okay, are we definitely strong yes, thumbs up, or we're kind of lukewarm. Maybe it's kind of on the fence. But this makes it very, very objective. So that way it's very clear. Otherwise, you're kind of just, from A to B, you're kind of just getting a rough sense, and it's like you hard to quantify. So each and every one of our interviews has a scoring rubric like this that every interviewer can make a copy and calculate their scores in their heads. And when we do calibration between the shadower, reverse shadower, we use this kind of rubric. They both go and calculate their scores, meet together, and say, are we in the ballpark? If one person said definitely no, another person said definitely yes, that's we have some work to be done, right? So, uh, all right. So now that you have your rubric, now that you have your competencies, this actually sets up the stage for having a guided discussion. So it is actually our job as interviewers to make sure that we go out and get those signals. This is something I've noticed does a lot of interviewers kind of miss is they feel that this is maybe more like an exam where you kind of observe the candidate and see how the candidate does, and then if they do great, great. If not, then move on. But that's not quite the right framing because as a interviewer, you actually have a job. You actually have a job to be done that's well defined as a rubric. So if I'm interviewing a candidate, this is my spec sheet. I actually have to go in the interview and make sure that hey, like I am getting signals for their pragmatism. I'm getting signals for their product engineering chops, and I am managing their time. So it's not that they are veering off course and spending time on one category over the other, because then I have failed as an interviewer and I didn't clearly communicate expectations that hey, yeah, let's spend 10 minutes, let's do this, then I get the signals, then let's move on, let's spend the other 10 minutes on this. I'm constantly guiding the candidate on and making sure that they're spending the right time in the right place, because ultimately I want the candidate to succeed. I'm not going to give them the answer to the test, but at least I'm telling them, hey, you got to focus your time on this portion of the test. Now you focus your time on this portion of the test. If I let the candidate kind of just go with it, pretty sure I'm not going to get signals on a lot of these criteria. So that's super important, and that also kind of puts the candidate to ease. That okay, I think my interviewer has got my best interest in mind. It's not a exam where they're looking for me to fail. They're actually looking for me to succeed. And lastly, I want to kind of leave you with this sample kind of end-to-end process that we've used. So each and every interview is well defined. We have where does it start? Who's actually kicking off the role? Who's going to do the preliminary screening? A guide for that. Again, it has a rubric, it has a scoring rubric and competencies all in a document. So no matter who's doing the screening, they know exactly what the playbook is. Same with the hiring manager screens. Same with the take home. Same with the on-site, debrief, executive interviews, final interview. Each and every interview has a playbook, a score, a rubric. So no matter who's going in and out of these interviews and process, we make sure that we are fair in assessing candidates, and the candidate experience important is consistent from candidate A to candidate B. So that way we're making sure that the bar for the talent is consistent and we actually have a very high um, hiring bar for our talent. So yeah, love to kind of hear questions. What kind of thoughts come to mind? And happy to chat more.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesal. That was a great presentation. Really, really informative. Loved that you had an example of your rubric and your hiring process, like all of the different handoffs of a candidate. And also kind of like that structure of a shadowing program, which is really, really, really important that more than one person can effectively interview someone. You know, you never know when someone's going to go on maternity leave or they're going to be sick or something, where you can't just have one person that's able to effectively ask all of the questions. So we do have a time for a couple of questions. I'll start with one, and then we have another one from Lior in the chat. So I'll start with mine first, and that is, if you are hiring for a technology that you don't have any developers proficient yet in your company on this technology, say you want to begin doing mobile development and you want to hire somebody to lead React Native development, how do you effectively hire someone where no one in the company yet has that skill?
Yeah. Well, we've actually taken a couple of different approaches. One was that our mindset was regardless of the technology that we are assessing the candidate for, let's assess their fundamental skills. Are they a good engineer? And if you're a good engineer, you should have certain mindsets, certain skills that you approach work with. So we design technology agnostic assessment. So we let the candidate pick hey, which technology are you comfortable in? And they would pick the language, they would pick the framework, and they would inform the interviewer that, hey, this is why I'm making these kind of choices. This is why I'm doing this. So in the process of them actually explaining the technology, they get signals that, okay, they know what they're doing. So that's one approach that we're taking. It's not perfect. We would miss out on technology specific signals. The other approach is actually to go to firms like G2I and say, hey, you guys are the experts. Why don't you assess? We in-house don't have this capability. We don't have engineers who know this technology. And we really want to kind of kickstart a function, like you mentioned, like mobile development. So that's again, it's kind of great from so many different perspectives, right? Like you guys bringing that technology expertise, but also assessing the assessment in the right way. You're setting up the right kind of assessment. You know what to look for, and that kind of again is a weight off the shoulders of the hiring team. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Leor asked a question in the chat. Technical abilities are super important, especially in an engineering role. With that being said, cultural fit, personality, and motivation are also super important. Do you recommend doing this before the technical assessment, or should the technical assessment be the first step in the interview process?
Yeah, this is a great question. We we have experimented with this quite a bit, and what we've kind of found is it's actually important to get signals on both upfront. So what we've done is we after our recruiting screen touch point, we have a hiring manager screen, and part of the hiring manager screen, what we assess for is that culture. I kind of like to call it as culture add. Are they going to add to our culture? What kind of mindsets do they have? And then we pivot to a bit of a technical assessment. It's a very lightweight assessment. We let the candidate kind of pick the technology and we kind of go with like, hey, let's design a little service that goes out and does API call or something very basic that doesn't take that long, 5, 10 minutes, but we just get their quick sense that hey, are they able to do some of the basics? And then if you're thumbs up on both, we move them to a little bit of a more rigorous technical assessment round, and then more rigorous kind of mindsets and behaviors interview.
That makes sense. So you're not spending too much time in either of those camps, but you can get a
Mhm.
quick assessment both ways and then move forward. Louis Christie has a question. I heard I heard interviews can have bias towards extroverts. How do you hire introverts?
Oh yeah, I love this question. And you'll kind of going back to my talk. You'll see that I talked about written communication a lot, setting up the expectations ahead of time, and this was actually one of the drivers. Is like not only introverts and extroverts, but let's be inclusive of neurodivergent candidates. For them, we want to make sure that, hey, like, we will present you an interview in a very structured way, but we will also give you the assessment. We'll give you the repository, the code ahead of time, so you have time to wrap your head around it and not feel super nervous or super overwhelmed in the interview setting. So we try to extract as much things out of the interview setting that are could cause the shock factor, right? And then also the other piece about guiding the candidate. So if they're not an extrovert, maybe they're not going to be proactive about talking about certain things. But as an interviewer, I have my job to be done. I have that listed out. So regardless of their introverts, extroverts, I'm going to go and guide them and say, hey, talk about this piece, talk about that piece, and set the stage for them.
Yeah, I think that's such a great answer. I feel like it's all about, getting you want everybody to show up to the best of who they are because you don't want to miss out on somebody just because they're an introvert or they're really shy. You want the best candidates for your company. So I love this emphasis on first getting very strong clarity and consensus among your team before the hiring process even starts. And then once you all agree, create this playbook or these expectations with prepared materials, links, anything, and have that packaged up and ready to go to the candidates so that they can show up
Mhm.
as their best self. Which it sounds like this has been a very successful formula for you. So, really interesting conversation. We are at time, so I wanted to just give you an opportunity. Any final thoughts to share with us today?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this has been a great conversation. Reach out to me on social media and reach out offline. I'm happy to answer any questions. All this that I've presented has come with a lot of experimentation and a lot of learnings. So happy to continue the conversation offline. But
I
thank you for
mean,
having me.
of course, absolutely. No, thank you for being here. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. This was a fun conversation, really informative, and we will see you for the next one. Have a great day.